The galaxy had been at war for centuries, long before Earth even had the capability to launch a single satellite into space. The conflict had become an almost timeless feature of galactic life. It spanned entire star systems, from the radiant worlds of the Zathori to the desolate moons of the Eldar Ku. Entire civilizations were being lost, their planets scorched, their species driven to the brink of extinction by the relentless march of the Zorka. This was not just a war. It was an extinction-level event that threatened the very fabric of the galaxy itself. The Exorka were unlike any enemy the galaxy had ever known. They were not beings made of flesh and blood, nor were they bound by any physical form. The Exorka were a collective consciousness, a swarm of entities existing across multiple dimensions simultaneously. They were ancient, their origins shrouded in mystery, their powers far beyond the comprehension of most races. They consumed entire civilizations, not by conquering them, but by corrupting them. The Exorgai didn't need to destroy a species to win. They just needed to twist their minds and bring them under their thrall. The galaxy's defense against this unyielding force was a coalition of civilizations, formed over millennia. The Zathori, with their graceful ships and long-range energy weapons, stood as stalwart defenders. The Eldar Ku, a race of warrior scholars, wielded ancient technology, their fleets a reflection of their advanced understanding of the cosmos. The Valaris, known for their psionic abilities, had once been the most powerful race in the galaxy, but now, even their abilities were being overrun by the Zorkai's psychic onslaught. The alliance between these and other races was their last hope, a hope that had dwindled with each passing year as more and more systems fell to the invaders. Despite their combined efforts, the coalition had made little progress. Every time they gained ground, the Zorka adapted. Their forces didn't fight the way other civilizations did. They were unpredictable, unrestrained by tactics or strategy, instead focusing on overwhelming their enemies with sheer psychological force. No matter how advanced the galaxy's technology was, no matter how skilled the warriors, they couldn't stop the Zorka from worming their way into minds and breaking down their enemies from the inside out. And then, Earth was discovered. The first contact was accidental. A scout ship from the Galactic Council was scanning the fringe of the galaxy when they detected a strange anomaly. A signal of some sort, crude and unrefined, but unmistakably artificial. It was Earth, broadcasting its first radio transmissions into the depths of space, little more than a primitive radio wave compared to the highly sophisticated communications of other species. The Council had taken notice. At first, they thought the humans were a curiosity, perhaps a species not even aware of the existence of other civilizations, but that would soon change. When the human diplomats finally arrived at the Galactic Council's headquarters, the atmosphere was one of skepticism. What could this young, relatively unknown species possibly offer in a war that had lasted millennia? How could humanity, with its primitive technology and short history, stand a chance against a force as formidable as the Zorka? Yet, even as the Council's leaders exchanged uncertain glances, one thing became clear: the humans weren't afraid. Their first message was simple, but direct. We've been fighting for survival since the beginning. If you need help, we're here. The other races were silent. They had fought wars for eons, but these humans, these children of a distant planet, were offering something they hadn't seen before: determination. There was a fire in their eyes, a willingness to fight not just for survival, but to win. Despite their late arrival, the galaxy now had a new hope. The first meeting between Earth's representatives and the Galactic Council was nothing short of extraordinary. The human delegation had arrived in their modest but sturdy spacecraft, a far cry from the sleek, luminous ships of the more established races. Colonel Sarah Donovan, the head of the human delegation, led the team with a composed demeanor. She was a battle-hardened veteran. one who had led humans through conflicts on Earth that had shaped their resilience, their pragmatism, and their unshakable resolve. As she stood before the council's gathered leaders, her eyes scanned the room. There were beings in that chamber that had existed for millennia. Some of them had seen entire galaxies rise and fall, while others were so ancient their original homeworlds had long since crumbled into dust. In contrast, the humans had barely begun to explore the stars. Earth itself was still healing from the ravages of its own past, scars left by war, environmental collapse, and the chaos of the 21st century. Yet there they were, standing at the cusp of an intergalactic war, offering help to those who had been fighting for far longer than humanity had even known about the conflict. The contrast was not lost on the Council, and many of its members viewed the humans' arrival with a mixture of disbelief and wariness. "Welcome to the war, Kael-Orin," the towering Zathori leader said in his deep, rumbling voice. He was a formidable presence. His kind were tall, their bodies encased in shimmering armor, their eyes glowing faintly with the intensity of their centuries-old wisdom. The Zathori had always been known as fierce warriors, masters of energy manipulation, and their fleets had driven back countless invaders. But even Kael-Orin's stature seemed diminished by the looming threat of the Zorka. His tone, usually commanding and full of confidence, now held a hint of weariness. "We fought for eons. Our combined forces are only barely holding the line. Do you think your species has what it takes?" Sarah Donovan did not hesitate. Standing straight, her voice steady but carrying the weight of countless battles, she replied, "We may not have the technology you have. We may not have your centuries of experience, but what we do have is something you can't replicate. We've had to fight for everything, every inch of land, every moment of peace. We don't know how to give up." Her words cut through the heavy air of skepticism in the chamber, and for the first time since her arrival, she saw something flicker in the eyes of the council members. It wasn't hope, at least not yet, but it was curiosity. Humanity's story, though short, was one of constant survival against impossible odds, and that narrative had a power all its own. "Let me get this straight," Kael-Orin said, his voice low but tinged with interest. "You claim that your species can turn the tide of a war we have fought for millennia with nothing more than stubbornness and determination?" "It's not just stubbornness," Donovan replied, her eyes unwavering. "It's resourcefulness. It's the ability to think on our feet when the odds are stacked against us. We don't always win, but we never stop fighting." The other races listened intently, exchanging looks of uncertainty. There was no denying the conviction in her voice, but the task ahead was unimaginable. The Zorka had already overrun entire systems, rendering all conventional tactics and weapons useless. No race, no matter how powerful, had been able to break through the psychic onslaught the Zorka unleashed on their enemies. Earth was far behind the galactic curve, both technologically and strategically, but what Sarah Donovan had said was undeniable. Humanity's spirit was unyielding, a force that could not be easily extinguished. "We don't need to fight your battles for you," Donovan continued, "but we'll fight beside you, and we'll learn. We've always learned. Let us show you what we can do." For a moment, there was silence in the room as the council members processed her words. Then, Kael-Orin gave a subtle nod, a signal of approval, or at least reluctant acceptance. "Very well. You may join the fight. But remember, we do not know how to lose, and neither can you. The Zorka will test everything you have." Donovan met his gaze with a steady determination. "We're ready." With that, the humans were officially part of the war, and though they had arrived late to the conflict, no one in the room could ignore the weight of what they brought with them, the promise of a new kind of warrior, one who fought not just with weapons, but with the strength of sheer will. The first real test of humanity's worth in the war came sooner than anyone had expected. The Galactic Council had granted Earth's forces access to the front lines, and Colonel Sarah Donovan was given command of a small but significant mission. It was to be a strike against a key Zorka stronghold, a strategically vital system that had been holding back the coalition's progress for months. The Council's leaders insisted on a joint effort, with Earth's military forces working alongside the more established powers. But Donovan, true to her nature, refused to simply follow the orders of the more experienced races. Her plan was unorthodox. It was something no one else would have thought to try. While the Council's forces would prepare to launch a coordinated assault with their fleets of warships, Sarah insisted that the human forces operate on their own, unpredictable, fast, and merciless. She called it a guerrilla attack, a strategy drawn from humanity's own dark history of wars fought on their own soil. The Council commanders were skeptical. Their fleets were massive, armed with energy weapons that could obliterate planets. The other races had perfected their weapons of war, their strategies refined through millennia of practice. To them, the idea of a small band of humans operating outside the main offensive seemed reckless, even foolish. But Sarah had something they did not: an intrinsic understanding of survival. In the face of overwhelming odds, humanity had learned how to adapt, to innovate, and most of all, to surprise their enemies. The Exarchah had one critical weakness that most of the galaxy's seasoned commanders had failed to recognize. They were completely predictable in their overconfidence. They believed they had already won. Their psychic power had been enough to turn most forces into mere shadows of their former selves. But they underestimated the unpredictability of the human spirit. The mission was set to begin. Sarah's fleet, a ragtag group of Earth's most advanced ships, was far smaller and less impressive than the other ships in the Coalition's armada. Their hulls were rough, their weaponry comparatively primitive, but what they lacked in technology they made up for in sheer audacity. Sarah didn't order them to hide behind any shields or heavy defenses. Instead, she called for them to move quickly, striking fast, then vanishing before the enemy could retaliate. The first wave was a shock. The human ships, flying in tight, coordinated formations, darted in and out of the Zorka's stronghold's defenses like ghosts in the night. Their movements were erratic, seemingly without rhyme or reason. They didn't fight in perfect formations. They zigzagged, broke off into smaller groups, and then regrouped at random. The Zorka, accustomed to facing large, predictable fleets, were caught off guard by the unpredictable nature of their attackers. Their sensors struggled to lock onto the human ships, and the Zorka commanders found themselves second-guessing every movement. When the first wave of human ships launched their surprise strikes, disrupting key energy nodes and damaging the stronghold's command center, it became clear. This was no ordinary attack. Earth's forces were not here to fight with raw power. They were here to destabilize the enemy's tactics, to make them scramble and think on their feet. They weren't looking for a quick, decisive victory. They were looking to create chaos, to force the Zorka to play by human rules. The Exorja responded in kind, attempting to adapt to the shifting patterns of attack. But each time they tried to counter the human moves, Sarah's fleet slipped away, reappearing in a new place, always one step ahead. It was a dizzying dance of confusion and precision, one that the Zorja simply weren't prepared for. They had always relied on their psychic control to dominate, to control the battlefield, but against the humans, they couldn't predict what came next. As the minutes stretched into hours, the surprise grew. The Zorka began to lose ground, not because the human weapons were stronger, but because they were unpredictable. The battle raged on, and though the human fleet was outnumbered and outgunned, it was clear that they were not only surviving, but pushing the Zorka back. By the time reinforcements from the larger coalition fleets arrived, it was too late. The Zorka had already suffered significant losses. their command systems in disarray. The Coalition's forces swept in and finished the job, but it was humanity's cunning, their ability to think outside the box, that had made the real difference. Sarah Donovan stood on the bridge of her flagship as the battle ended. The voices around her were filled with excitement, but she remained focused. They had won the battle, but this was only the beginning. They had shown the galaxy that humanity's strength didn't lie in brute force alone. It was in their refusal to be predictable, their relentless creativity in the face of overwhelming odds. As her ship pulled away from the wreckage of the Zhorka stronghold, Sarah allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. They had shown the galaxy that Earth had more to offer than anyone had expected, and in that single moment, humanity had earned their place in the war. The attack on the Zhorka stronghold had changed everything. The battle was a resounding success, but it was more than just a tactical victory. It was a revelation. The galaxy had long believed that advanced technology and overwhelming force were the keys to victory, but the humans had shown that there was another way. For the first time, the other races began to see humanity not as a fledgling species, but as a powerful ally in the fight against the Zhorka. In the days that followed, the Coalition forces scrambled to adjust to the new reality. The shock of the humans' unorthodox tactics was still fresh, and many of the higher-ranking officers were both impressed and confused. How had such a small and seemingly underprepared force turned the tide of battle? The answer, it seemed, lay in humanity's ability to adapt and innovate under pressure, something no other race had truly mastered. The Zdatori, who had once dismissed Earth's involvement in the war as a mere curiosity, were now among the first to reconsider their stance. Kailorin, the Zdatori leader, had been skeptical of the humans' capacity to contribute anything meaningful to the war effort, but after seeing the chaos they had unleashed on the Zhorka, he had quietly conceded that there was more to humanity than their technology or their military might. It was their will that made them dangerous, something that even the most sophisticated races had a hard time understanding. Sarah Donovan had always believed that humanity's true strength lay in its ability to adapt, to think creatively in the face of impossible odds. It wasn't just about following the rules of war. It was about rewriting them. As she stood in the war room with her officers, the walls of the chamber lit by the faint glow of holographic maps and alien technology, she could sense the shift in the atmosphere. The room was buzzing with excitement, but beneath it was something else, a nervous energy. For the first time, the humans had been thrust into the role of the game changer, and it was both exhilarating and daunting. One of the officers, Lieutenant Harris, broke the silence. "Colonel, we've received word from the Council. They want us to lead another mission. This time it's bigger. The Zhorka have concentrated a fleet near the Perelian system, and it's vulnerable. The Zori are organizing an attack, but they want us to take the lead." His voice held a note of uncertainty. Sarah paused for a moment, considering the implications. The Perelian system was one of the most strategically significant in the war, containing both military outposts and vital resource worlds. If the humans led the attack, it would be a statement. It would be a chance to prove that the victory wasn't just a fluke. But there was risk. The Zhorka were relentless, and their psychic abilities had been devastating. It wasn't just about firepower. It was about the mind games the Zhorka played. "What's the plan?" she asked, her voice calm but determined. "We've analyzed the fleet's movements," Harris said, his tone shifting to business mode. "It's a typical Zhorka formation, predictable, but we've identified a vulnerability. They're using a central node to coordinate their forces. If we can disrupt that node, the whole fleet will fall into disarray." The plan was bold, and it was exactly the kind of mission that humans thrived on. It was risky, relying on their ability to outthink the Zhorka once again. There would be no overwhelming firepower, no massive fleet engagement. Instead, they would rely on their ability to sneak in, strike at the heart of the Zorka's command, and vanish before the enemy had time to react. "Let's make sure they never see us coming," Sarah said with a smile, her confidence unwavering. This was what she had trained for, the moment when humanity could prove to the galaxy that it wasn't a species to be underestimated. The weeks leading up to the attack were filled with tension. The humans, along with a handful of Zathori warships, carefully prepared their forces. The Zorka, confident in their superior psychic abilities, had grown complacent. They hadn't yet recognized the true nature of humanity's potential. They still believed that their enemies could be manipulated, their minds bent to the will of the Zorka. When the day of the mission arrived, the human fleet, now fully integrated into the coalition forces, slipped into the Perillian system with calculated precision. They didn't announce their presence. They didn't broadcast any signals. They simply appeared, as if from nowhere. The Zorkai's psychic network buzzed with confusion, but it was too late. The humans had already struck. They disabled the central node with surgical precision, their small, fast ships weaving through the enemy's defenses like predators in the night. It was the same tactic they had used before. Unpredictable, impossible to counter. The Zorka's mind-warping influence faltered as their psychic infrastructure was torn apart. Within moments, the once dominant fleet fell into chaos. The Zortori and the other coalition forces moved in, capitalizing on the confusion to deliver a crushing blow. When the battle was over, Sarah Donovan stood once again on the bridge of her flagship, watching as the remains of the Zorka fleet drifted into the void. It had been a smaller victory, but a critical one. It wasn't just about destroying an enemy fleet. It was about showing the galaxy that humanity was no longer a late arrival. They were a force to be reckoned with. And as the ships returned to their base, the other races watched in awe. Earth had done it again. The aftermath of the Perillian victory was a turning point for humanity and its place in the Galactic War. As the coalition forces regrouped and celebrated the success, the reverberations of their triumph spread far beyond the confines of the battlefield. The Zorka, once considered an unstoppable force, had been dealt another heavy blow. Their carefully constructed psychic network shattered once more by the relentless ingenuity of humanity. The victory was not just a military achievement, it was a psychological one, a signal to the entire galaxy that the tide of the war had begun to shift. Yet, as Sarah Donovan stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the data streams flicker across the console, she knew the fight was far from over. The Zorka were not simply going to roll over. They had adapted before, and they would do so again. Their ability to manipulate the minds of their enemies, to twist and bend them to their will, was a constant threat. The galaxy had seen fleets and entire armies fall to their psychic domination, and while humanity had been resistant to such control, there was no guarantee that this would always be the case. There was something deeply unsettling about the Zorka's ability to spread fear so effectively. It wasn't just their brute strength that made them dangerous. It was their subtlety, their ability to break down the minds of even the most steadfast warriors. For the first time, Sarah began to consider the true scale of what they were up against. The Zorka weren't just invaders from another galaxy. They were a force that sought to reshape the very minds of all those who opposed them, to turn their greatest strengths into weaknesses. No victory, no matter how significant, would be permanent unless the root cause of their power was understood and neutralized. And so, despite the optimism that followed the Perillian victory, Sarah found herself restless, plagued by the knowledge that the war was far from over. Back in the war room, the coalition leaders were already debating their next move. The Zathori had requested a larger, more coordinated strike to press their advantage. The Eldar Ku, still reeling from their own losses, were hesitant to commit their fleets fully, and the Valaris, with their formidable psychic abilities, were concerned about the growing threat the Zorka posed to their own kind. In all the discussions, one thing became clear. Humanity was no longer just a newcomer in the war. They were a vital part of the coalition's strategy. Sarah's role had changed too. She had gone from being a token representative to a tactical leader whose strategies were now sought after by the galaxy's most experienced commanders. Her ability to think outside the conventional bounds of warfare had made her invaluable, but it also brought a new weight of responsibility, the weight of expectation. The Council, in a rare move, asked Sarah to assist in the development of a new type of weapon, one that would counter the Zorka's psychic manipulation. They had begun to notice something curious about humanity's resistance to the Zorka's psychic influence. While other races struggled and succumbed, humans had shown an uncanny ability to fight back against their mental domination. It wasn't complete immunity, but it was something extraordinary, something that could potentially turn the tide of the war in ways the galaxy had never imagined. The question, however, was how. The technology, the mental faculties to truly understand what made humanity so resistant, was still out of reach. Scientists from the coalition were now working in concert with Earth's brightest minds, hoping to unlock this strange and powerful resilience. But Sarah knew that no matter how much science and technology were brought to bear on the problem, the answer lay in understanding humanity's history, their constant battles for survival, the struggles against their own darker nature, and the very nature of their spirit. As the work on the new weapon progressed, there were other signs that the Zorka were changing too. The psychic barriers they had once used so effectively began to crack. Reports from several systems indicated that the Zorka's mind control was weakening, as if their mental hold over the galaxy was beginning to fray at the edges. It wasn't clear why. Had humanity's presence forced them to adapt, to evolve their tactics, or was there something more fundamental happening? Something that suggested the Zorka were not as invincible as they had once believed. As Sarah walked through the corridors of the flagship, her mind raced with these questions. She knew that the victory at Pyralion was not enough. The Zorka might be vulnerable, but the galaxy still didn't understand how to truly fight them. Until they did, every victory was just a temporary reprieve. The war was still a battle for survival, and it was only by continuing to push forward, by using their greatest strengths, resilience, adaptability, and sheer will, that humanity could hope to truly change the course of the war. Here with us today to discuss this book is my friend. The galaxy had only just begun to see what Earth could do, and Sarah Donovan, standing alone in the quiet of the ship, realized that it was now her responsibility to make sure the humans' fight did not become a forgotten footnote in a war that had raged for millennia. The next battle would be the one that decided everything. The weeks that followed the victory at Pyralion were a whirlwind of preparation, analysis, and quiet uncertainty. The war had shifted, but the balance was fragile. Despite their success, Sarah Donovan couldn't shake the feeling that the true test was still ahead of them. She had been given a new directive by the coalition, one that would determine the next phase of the war. The Zorka were adapting to the human strategies with terrifying speed, and as the weeks passed, their psychic grip on the galaxy seemed to tighten again. It wasn't that they had given up or been defeated. They had simply taken a step back, recalibrating, learning from their encounters with humanity's unorthodox approach to combat. The new project, the weapon humanity had been tasked to develop, was no longer just an option. It was a necessity. The Council had given Earth's scientists and engineers full access to the vast data collected during the war, and they had begun to analyze the unique resistance humanity showed to the Zorka's psychic influence. There were whispers among the coalition's leaders that humanity's inexplicable resilience wasn't a fluke. There was something in the human brain, some adaptive quality that had allowed them to fight back against the Zorka in ways no other species had been able to. As Sarah walked the halls of the flagship, she was acutely aware of the pressure mounting on her. It was clear that the Coalition's future depended on Earth's ability to unlock the secret behind this resistance. The Zorka had exploited every advantage they had, breaking through the defenses of every civilization they encountered. Humanity, on the other hand, had a unique advantage: their stubbornness, their capacity to survive against impossible odds. But was that enough? Was there something more, something deeper in humanity's psyche that made them so resilient? She made her way to the command center, where the Coalition scientists were working alongside Earth's brightest minds. The room was filled with screens, holograms, and a low hum of conversation as data streamed in from various research stations. The atmosphere was tense, the weight of the task at hand palpable. Scientists from every race were poring over the data, comparing their findings, looking for patterns, but the answers were elusive. Dr. Lena Collins, one of the lead human researchers, approached Sarah as she entered. "Colonel, we've made some progress, but it's slow. We're still trying to isolate the specific neurological markers in humans that allow us to resist the Zorka's influence. But it's not clear what the threshold is, why some individuals are more resistant than others. It's frustrating." Sarah nodded, listening carefully. Dr. Collins had been working tirelessly, along with a team of human and alien scientists, to develop a solution. The data they had was promising, but it was clear that understanding the intricacies of the human mind was far more complicated than anyone had anticipated. And the clock was ticking. "You're not the only ones frustrated," Sarah said, her voice steady but laced with concern. "The Exorka are regrouping. Their fleets are being reinforced and they're evolving. We need something soon. Something that will give us the edge before they can adapt again." "I know," Dr. Collins replied, her tone grim. "But what's troubling is that we're starting to see evidence that some Zorka are also developing a resistance. It's like they're learning from us. This could mean they're capable of counteracting whatever we're preparing, but we don't have enough time to confirm it." The weight of that revelation settled heavily on Sarah's shoulders. The idea that the Zorka were evolving alongside humanity's innovations was a terrifying prospect. They weren't just a mindless enemy. They were thinking, adapting, becoming more dangerous by the day. It would be a race against time, and the odds were quickly stacking against them. The door to the command center opened, and General Kale Oren of the Zathori entered, his tall figure casting a long shadow. The Zathori had become one of humanity's most valuable allies, their advanced technology and tactical expertise complementing the humans' unpredictable strategies. But even Kale Oren, with his centuries of experience, had a worried look in his eyes. "Colonel Donovan," he said, his voice low and authoritative. "We've received intelligence from the Eldar K. The Zorka have begun to consolidate their forces. We estimate that within weeks they will launch a massive assault on our supply lines in the Safar system. If we lose that system, we lose the war." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The Safari system was crucial. It was a major logistics hub for the Coalition, and without it, their entire defensive structure would collapse. Losing it would mean a direct path for the Zorka to strike at the heart of the Coalition's territories. "We can't afford to wait," Sarah said firmly. "We need a plan, and we need it now." Kaloran nodded, his expression grim. "I will coordinate with the other fleets, but the Zorka have learned to fight in ways we didn't anticipate. We need to find a way to disrupt them before they arrive." "We'll be ready," Sarah said, her voice unwavering. "If we can't beat them with strength, we'll beat them with strategy. It's what we do best." As the room erupted into a flurry of activity, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of resolve. The coming battle would be the biggest test of humanity's place in the galaxy. The clock was ticking, and every decision would count. But despite the mounting pressure, Sarah knew one thing. Humanity had always thrived when the odds were stacked against them. This war was no different. They would fight, they would adapt, and they would surprise the galaxy once more. The Safari system was a vast, sprawling nexus of resources, a place where the Coalition's supply lines converged, and the last bastion of defense before the heart of their territories. Losing it would mean exposing the entire Galactic Alliance to the Zorka's wrath. The urgency of the situation was clear, as Sarah Donovan stood before the war room's holographic display, eyes scanning the flow of incoming intelligence. A fleet of Shorka warships was moving towards Safar, its numbers growing steadily. But it wasn't the size of the fleet that worried Sarah. It was the speed at which the Shorka had adapted to the humans' guerrilla tactics. "We've got maybe 3 days before they reach the outer rim of the system," Lieutenant Harris said, his voice tight with urgency. "If we don't hit them hard and fast, they'll lock down our supply lines and we won't have any reinforcements." Sarah nodded, her thoughts racing. The Coalition's fleet had already been stretched thin across multiple fronts, and the Zathori, while formidable, couldn't be everywhere at once. The humans were once again in the position of being the underdogs, facing an enemy that had grown increasingly unpredictable and dangerous. But this time, Sarah had no intention of simply following the established protocols. Humanity's strength had always been in its ability to improvise, to think creatively. She'd learned that the hard way, from the Zorka's overconfidence in their psychic powers to the surprising resilience of her own people. If they were going to hold the Safar system, they needed to hit the Zorka where it hurt. Not with overwhelming force, but with an unpredictable strike that played to humanity's strengths. "Deploy the fleet," Sarah ordered, her voice firm and commanding. "But this time I want the Zathori to hit the main fleet head-on. We'll take the outskirts with a fast-moving strike team." The room fell silent for a moment as her plan was processed. The Zathori commanders exchanged wary glances, but K'Loren gave a stiff nod, his tall form unwavering. "We will comply," he said, "but your strategy depends on the element of surprise. If the Zorka adapt again, we'll force them to adapt faster than they can think," Sarah interrupted, a glint of determination in her eyes. "They can't predict us if we keep them off balance." The plan was set in motion almost immediately. The human fleet was small in comparison to the Coalition's other forces, but their speed and unpredictability had proven invaluable. They would stage an initial strike, targeting a key Zorka communications relay deep in the outer edge of the system, before pulling back and reappearing in unexpected locations. The Zathori, with their unmatched firepower, would be the hammer to humanity's scalpel, drawing the Zorka in and creating the chaos they needed to disable their command structures. As Sarah prepared to leave the war room, her mind kept returning to the issue that had been weighing heavily on her for days: the human resistance to the Zorka's psychic influence. There was something about it, something deep in their minds that made them more resilient. The scientists were still working on theories, but she couldn't help but feel that there was more to it than anyone realized. Could it be that humanity's experience with psychological warfare, generations of conflict, strife, and survival, had prepared them in ways they didn't fully understand? Perhaps their ability to fight back against the Zorka's manipulation was something born not from strength, but from sheer willpower, a force of mind that didn't bend easily to control. The fleet jumped into hyperspace, and the silence aboard Sarah's flagship was deafening. It wasn't fear. It was the calm before a storm. Every officer on the ship knew what was at stake. It wasn't just a battle for the Safar system. It was a battle for the survival of the Coalition. As they approached the system's outer rim, the humans' attack began. At first, it was a blur of calculated strikes, hitting the Zorka's outer defenses, sowing confusion, and pulling back before they could retaliate. But then, the Zorka engaged. The sight of their massive warships bearing down on the enemy was enough to send ripples of uncertainty through the Zorka ranks. But just as the battle seemed to be going in their favor, something unexpected happened. A wave of psychic interference washed over the fleet, and for a moment, the human ships faltered. It wasn't a full mental assault, but a targeted disruption, a way to test their defenses. Sarah gripped the edge of the command console, trying to push past the haze in her mind. She could feel the pressure building, a subtle, insidious pull at the edges of her consciousness. The Exorca were trying to break her, to use their power to manipulate her thoughts. She'd felt this before, and it was like a shadow creeping over her mind, trying to take root. But she resisted. With a force that she didn't fully understand, Sarah pushed back against the intrusion. The memory of every battle she had fought, every hardship humanity had endured, surged within her. The drive to survive, to protect those she cared about, to fight back against any force that sought to crush her will. It was more than just instinct. It was humanity's greatest strength. And as the psychic assault faltered, Sarah realized that the Zorka's influence over the humans wasn't as complete as they had thought. Humanity's resistance wasn't just a fluke. It was something deeper, something that even the Zorka couldn't control. The tide of the battle shifted as the humans rallied, using their unpredictability to outmaneuver the Zorka once again. It wasn't just about winning this battle. It was about showing the galaxy that humanity had a power that the Zorka couldn't defeat. The battle for Safer raged on, but one thing was clear. Humanity was no longer the underdog. They were the wild card, and the Zorkai would never see them coming.